For this lab, we're going to be going over the brain anatomy and functions. So there are four major brain regions. You have your cerebral hemispheres. Those are the two main lobes. So here and here. You have your diencephalon. Okay, we'll talk more about this structure. It's kind of hard to see here. It contains your pituitary, your thalamus, your hypothalamus, your epithalamus. They're all kind of in here and then buried up in here. You have your brain stem. Okay, you have your midbrain up here, then your pons and your medulla. Whoops. And then you have your cerebellum, which kind of looks like a little wrinkly brain at the base under the occipital lobe of your brain. So some features. If you talk about gyri or the gyrus, these are the ridges. So like here, like this ridge. This is an important gyri that we'll talk about. And then sulci or sulcus, that's a groove. And then you have your fissures. These are really deep grooves. Like right here, you have your longitudinal fissure that separates the lobes of your brain, your transverse cerebral fissure. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to look at, oh goodness, some of the external brain structures. And the first one is the four lobes, the four external visible lobes, and then you have a fifth lobe that's kind of buried and deep. So for your lobes, you have your frontal lobe. Okay, this lies behind your frontal bone. You have your temporal lobe. Okay, underneath your temporal bone of your skull. And then you have your parietal lobe here, and then your occipital lobe in the back. The fifth lobe is your insula, your insular lobe. It's buried deep in the lateral sulcus. So there's the lateral sulcus, so it's kind of buried underneath here. Okay, so the longitudinal fissure, I've already kind of talked about that, and I'm just going straight through the word bank. Remember, for your prior school, you need to know everything that's on your word bank. Okay, so here's your longitudinal fissure. It divides your cerebrum into your right and left halves. Then you have your central sulcus. Okay, your central sulcus, right here that's highlighted in blue, divides your frontal lobe from your parietal lobe. So there's your frontal lobe, and then there's your parietal lobe. Okay, and then you have your post-central gyrus and your pre-central gyrus, so central sulcus, pre-central gyrus, and then post-central gyrus. Now when we talk about the functional areas, those are important functional areas. And then you have your parieto-occipital sulcus that divides your parietal lobe from your occipital lobe. Then you have your transverse cerebral fissure. It's right here. This is what separates your cerebrum from your cerebellum. Lateral sulcus, did I go over that? Okay, well, your lateral sulcus, since it's not on your word bank, I probably won't test you on it, but this separates your frontal from your temporal lobe, frontal lobe, temporal lobe. Okay, so now for your functional areas, you have your primary motor cortex. This is what's responsible for your conscious or your voluntary movement. So when you think about moving or you think about initiating movement, it originates in this region of the brain. It's in your precentral gyrus. So right here, you select it in blue, it'll pop up here. It tells you it's your primary motor cortex. You can also read all about it. You click the little definition here, it'll tell you all about that primary motor cortex. Okay, and then Broca's area, this is the motor area for speech. So let's go, we'll color code it. Maybe, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, sorry, Visible Body and I were having a moment and I had to restart. Okay, so we're talking about Broca's area. So Broca's area, it's kind of neat. It's the motor area for speech. So this just controls the musculature that's needed to make sound, but it doesn't control your association of speech and your comprehension, your language comprehension. So you can damage this area of your brain. You won't be able to physically speak, but you do know what it is you want to say, and you can understand what people are saying to you. But it's really neat because people that have damage to this area that can't speak, they can actually sing what they want to say, because singing actually involves a different area of your brain. Okay, so just, that's kind of cool. So there's Broca's area. Oh, come on. Right there in the blue. Okay, and then you have your frontal eye field. Your frontal eye field is located about in here. It's superior to Broca's area. And that frontal eye field is responsible for voluntary movements of the eye. Okay, and then you have your really important area, your prefrontal cortex. It's also known as your prefrontal association area. This is responsible really for thought and for higher level thinking, personality, all that is located right there in that prefrontal cortex, or that prefrontal association area. And then you have your primary somatosensory cortex. Somato just means dealing with the body, and then sensory, these are your senses. And so this is responsible for your skin, your skeletal muscles, and your joints, so sensation in those areas. It's in the post-central gyrus, so right here, there we go. And then you have your gustatory cortex. It's buried deep in your insula. Gustation means to taste, so this is your area involved in taste. Then your primary visual cortex, it's in the very back of the occipital lobe. This is for vision. It processes all the visual signals that come in, and since we'll talk about the crossing of your optic nerve, and since it crosses, this actually takes signals from the opposite visual field. So in your left visual cortex, it receives images from your right eye. Your right visual cortex receives images from your left eye. We'll talk about vision. Vision is really, well, what your brain does to what you see is really pretty amazing, because actually everything you see is upside down and inverted, but your brain knows that that's not right, so it flips everything around so that you don't see the carpet on the ceiling. Okay. Where were we? The primary auditory cortex, this is in the temporal lobe, right up against the lateral sulcus. And this is for processing sound. Then you have Wernicke's area. Oh, come on. This is responsible for understanding speech. So if you damage Wernicke's area, you don't understand what people are saying to you. You can form words though, because Broca's area is still intact. But this area is responsible for you being able to understand written and spoken language. Right now we're going to get into some internal brain structures. So I'm on a different view. I've hidden the right cerebral hemisphere so that we can see these internal structures. So the first one is the corpus callosum. This is a commissure that connects the hemispheres. It surrounds the diencephalon. So it's this area right here. Then you have your cingulate gyrus right here. This increases the surface area of the brain. It also plays a role in your limbic system. Your limbic system is kind of like your emotional brain, your emotional center. We've already talked about the central sulcus, the parieto-occipital sulcus, and the cerebellum. So next we will look at the brainstem. I'm actually going to hide the cerebellum, this side of the right side of the cerebellum, so that we can see the brainstem a little bit better. So this is your brainstem. It connects to your spinal cord. This is where it exits that foramen magnum of your skull. Next, you have your diencephalon. Your diencephalon consists of 3 different structures. You have your thalamus, which is the largest part of your diencephalon. You have your hypothalamus, and then you have your epithalamus. Within your hypo means low or below. Within your hypothalamus, this is where your pituitary gland is. Your pituitary gland is really important. It's kind of like your master endocrine gland that controls and secretes hormones. Your epithalamus contains your pineal gland. This secretes melatonin. Melatonin helps regulate your sleep-wake cycles. So your diencephalon, there's your pituitary gland, so this would be your hypothalamus. Right here. And then to get to your thalamus, we are going to have to dissect some of this away. Oh, no, it keeps dissecting. There we go. Okay, so there's your thalamus. And then your epithalamus. Oh, we have so much stuff in the way. Okay, it's right here, behind the thalamus. Okay, now we're going to look at the cerebellum. So, oh, come on. Okay, so here's your cerebellum. This is the left lobe of your cerebellum. You have this structure that's known as your, I guess it won't let me select it, your vermis. Let me see if I can put the other half of the cerebellum back. Okay, now it'll let me select it. So you have your vermis. This is what connects the two lobes. It's kind of this little lobe right here in the middle. Then you have, then you have your arbor vitae. We will actually hide that. So this is just the tree-like, it just selects the whole thing. The tree-like appearance of the folds in the cerebellum. So you can see, if you kind of turn it, okay, it won't let me do that because I'm zoomed in too far. It kind of looks like a little tree. So the cerebellum, and hopefully you've read this in your reading already in OpenStax and in Visible Body, but this is kind of like where the blueprint for all of your movements is made, and so this helps make all of your skeletal muscle movements nice and smooth and coordinated. Anyone that has problems with their cerebellum, their movements are jerky or shaky or uncoordinated because they don't have that nice blueprint coming from their cerebellum going to their frontal cortex. Okay, and I have less than a minute left until my timer runs out because I'm using the free version of Screencast-O-Matic. So we're going to talk about the meninges really quickly. The meninges are 3 different layers that protect your brain. Your outer layer is this tough, leathery region. It's called the dura mater. Literally translates into hard mother. And you have your periosteal layer. This is attached to the inside of the skull, and then your meningeal layer. It forms the outside covering of your brain. And then you have your subdural space that separates these dura from the arachnoid mater. In your arachnoid mater, you have your subarachnoid space. This is important because this is where you have cerebrospinal fluid that cushions and protects and nourishes the brain. And then pia clings directly to the brain.